L'kuta Sicha is Chelek Chav Gimel, Sicha for Parshas Matos, Lili Nishmas of Yosef Binyamin ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. Today we're going to discuss the war of Midian, the war that the Yidden wage against Midian, and how it is different than other wars that were waged by the Yidden for the purpose of conquering land. And we are going to see a number of different halachic relevances based on this difference. It turns out that we're going to be exploring a number of different Rambams, but once we bring them all together, of course, it will end beautifully and very, very geschmack. The Parsha Seinu Retzich wegen zwei Milchamas von Eden mit Elam. This Parsha, Parshas Matos, discusses two different wars between the Jewish people and other nations. The first war, which is the war against Midian, that Parsha actually tells us the story of what took place. The second war that we're talking about, the Milchama ha'asid tzukevus ein Eretz Yisrael, a Milchama that will yet happen in the future, which was to conquer Eretz Yisrael, v'di b'nei Gad und b'nei Reuven haben sich untergenommen zu sein der Chalutz Tzavel of Nei Hashem Milchama. What this parsha talks about is how the Shvatim, the tribes of Gad and Reuven, took upon themselves to arm themselves and to join the army and go to war for Eretz Yisrael, even though they themselves were not going to be living in Eretz Yisrael. They were given the portion on the Ever HaYarden, on the east side of the Yarden River. Nevertheless, in the end of Parshas Matos, we learn about the agreement that they had, that they will go to war with the Yidden, for the Yidden, to conquer Eretz Yisrael. The Chelek zwischen die zwei Milchamas is moving from the Psukim Gufa, and the difference between these two wars can be understood from the context of the Psukim. Milchamas Midian is given with the Rebbe hat gesagt, Nekoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael meisa Midyanim. The Milchama of Midian, the war against Midian, was, as the pasuk says, as Hashem says to Moshe, avenge the vengeance for the Jewish people from the Midianites. Matos Milchama is given vayargu kol zachar. The purpose of this war was to kill out all the males, als nekama, as an event, as a vengeance. For them was even getan zu Yidden, for what they did to the Yidden, that they sent their daughters to seduce the Yidden and cause them to sin. Additionally, Rashi also says that the people of Moav, at least they were trying to defend themselves. The people of Midian involved themselves in a fight that wasn't theirs, and this was considered a terrible thing, which is why Nekama was being taken against them. Es steht aber nicht, as the Yidden haben das getan zu übersetzen ihre Stadt, but it does not anywhere say that the Yidden were doing this in order to conquer and settle and live in their cities. As a matter of fact, the pasuk says just the opposite. All of the cities and all of the castles were burned in fire. What they took into captivity were the women, the children, and the wealth. The wealth they took for themselves as spoils of war, but they did not take the cities to live in them. Whereas the war of Bnei Gad and Reuven were the nations that at the time inhabited the land of Canaan, later to become Eretz Yisrael. Even though for Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, the only goal was to drive out the enemy, they themselves were not settling in Eretz Yisrael, they were on the east side of the Yarden. But the goal, the purpose of the war in general was to inhabit the land, Yishuv, to conquer the land and to settle the land. As the Bnei Gad and Reuven said in the pasuk, we will arm ourselves swiftly for the Yidden, Ad asher im havi oinum el mekayim, until we bring them to their place. The goal here was to bring them to their place, which was Eretz Yisrael and Nachmer. Leinashiv el bateinu, we're not going back home. Ad hisnachel b'nei Yisrael, until the Yidden will have inherited the land. Ish nachalasa, each person his own inheritance. So we have two wars, Midian, which the point of Midian was for Nekama and not Kibush, not to inhabit their land, but just to avenge their wrongdoings to the Yidden. And then there was the war of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, led by Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, which was for the purpose of conquering Eretz Yisrael and settling in the land. So there's two types of war. There's a war of vengeance, there's a war of settling. And these are the two wars that are discussed in the Parsha. In Sif Beis, the Rebbe is going to now go into a Rambam and a Ravid, and he's going to say that once we've established, as we have in Sif Aleph, that Midian was a Milchama of Nekama, it was a war of vengeance, it will help us understand a halacha in the Rambam and a question that the Ravid asks on the Rambam. So let's take it slowly. According to this, that the Milchama of Midian was not for the purpose of conquering the land. To conquer it, to become his own. And to settle in the land of Midian. Once we understand this, as we explained in Sif Aleph, this will answer a question which the Ravid asks on the Rambam. So for this, we're going to go to the Rambam in Hilchas Shmita v'Yovel, the last Perek, almost the end of Hilchas Shmita v'Yovel in Rambam. Din. There's a din is, and this is in Halacha Yud, as Kol Shevert Levi Musharin Shlayinchulu Beretz Canaan. The entire Shevert Levi, the entire tribe of Levi, is restricted from inheriting a portion of the land of Canaan, which means there were certain cities that were designated for them to live, but unlike all of the Shvatim, which each Shevet received a nachala, an inheritance, a portion of Eretz Yisrael, Shevert Levi does not receive their own portion in Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, they are also restricted. They do not receive a portion of the loot, of the spoils of war, when these cities are conquered. The Rambam over there brings, the pasuk says, Lo yiyeh lakoyanim lahalavim kol shevet Levi chelek v'nachla. There should not be to the koyanim, from the for the people from the shevet Levi, a chelek or a nachala. Says the Rambam, chelek is bebiza, no portion of the spoils of the loot, and v'nachala, no inheritance in the land. That's halacha yud. Zok the Rambam. The Rambam continues in halacha yud aleph. Yeroy Ali, it seems to me, she'ein advarim amurim, that this din, that the Levim don't get a chelik in Eretz Yisrael, chelik in the land, or a portion of the loot, is only applicable be'eretz shenichnas aleh bris lavram litzchak liYaakov, only in the land upon which a covenant was made with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the Yeshua b'neiim, and then their descendants inherited that land. V'nischal kolahem, and it was divided amongst them, obviously referring to Eretz Yisrael. Only in Eretz Yisrael is the din that a Levi cannot inherit the land, and a Levi cannot have a part of the biza of the loot. But any other land that a king from the Jewish kings is conquering, the Koyanim and the Leviim have a portion in those lands and in the spoils and the loot from the war, like any other Yid. That's what the Rambam says. That the halacha that loy applies only in Eretz Yisrael, but not in other lands. That's the Rambam says. Frekter of the Ravid. So the Ravid asks on the Rambam, Vaharei, bebizas midyon leinot l'chelik b'Yisrael, ela b'truma. When it comes to Bizas Midyan, the loot from Midyan, what happens is that the Levium do not get a part of it. What does happen is that a very small percentage is given to the Levium, as the pasuk says, that whatever came in was divided into two. Half of it went to the Yidden, half of it went to Elazar HaKoyin, and the other half went to the Yidden. Half of what went to the Yidden, not half, and of the half that went to the Yidden, 1/50th, which is 2%, went to the Levium. So the Levium got 2% of 50%, and that was all they got. And that, as we'll see in a moment, was called Trumas HaMeches. There was a tax that the Yidden had to give, and of the tax, there was a Truma that was given to the Levium. A portion was given to the Levium, but a very, very small portion. Asks the Ravid, how can you say that outside of Eretz Yisrael, the Levium receive a portion in the Biza, if by Midian they didn't get a portion? All they got is the Truma, the little donation, the little small 2% that they got. And this was the mitzvah of the Eibishter. The Eibishter commanded it should be this way. So we see from Bizas Midyan, says the David, as that even in the conquering of other lands, that the Koyanim Levium Nitkachal Yisrael, Koyanim Levium are not equal to the other Yidden. And don't receive a portion of the land or a part in the loot. That's the David's question. The Rambam established in Halacha Yud Aleph that a person receives, that the Levium receive a portion of the land and of the loot like any other Yid. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, here you have Midian, which is outside of Eretz Yisrael, and yet they don't get Idacharaya that Shar Kol HaRotzes does not get. So before we get to the Rebbe's answer, we're going to first learn the Kesef Mishnah's answer. The Kesef Mishnah answer is like this. V'soiver Rabbeinu, the Rambam holds, the Ad Rabba, Misham Raya, there is a Raya from Midian, the Midich Hazinon, the Be'eret Shenichras Le'abris Le'nat L'chelik V'biza Klal. Because we see that in Eretz Yisrael, the land upon which there was a covenant, they didn't get even 2%. Midian Notlu, and in Midian at least they got something. Also, Legluya, this reveals to us, this teaches us, the Midian, that by Midian, because there was no covenant upon it, it's not included in the rule that the Koyanim of the Levim should not get a portion, and they got something. And therefore from this we could learn that all other lands upon which there is no covenant, like there is in Eretz Yisrael, also get something. What do I mean by something? By something, I mean that there's no, the din of La'yiyah, La'koyanim, Halavim, Kol Shevet, Levi, Chelek, V'nachla doesn't apply there. Which would mean that in other Aratzis they would get a full portion. So in that case, what about Midian? So in that case, why by Midian do they not get an equal portion with everyone else? That was a specific decree from the Eibishter for that time and that time only, that they were only going to get the Truma, not the rest of it. So the Kesef Mishnah says like this, just to understand the Kesef Mishnah is saying, from the fact that in Midian they got something, this teaches me that outside of Eretz Yisrael, there's no din of La'yiyah, La'koyanim, La'levim, Kol Shevet, Levi, Chelek, V'nachla. That din does not apply outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'araya, in Midian, they got something even though it was only 2%. Why did they get 2%? In Midian, there was a specific decree from the Eibishter to only get 2%. But once we see that we went out of the cloud of La'yiyah, La'koyanim, La'levim, Kol Shevet, Levi, Chelek, V'nachla, we now know that outside of Eretz Yisrael, unless in the case of Midian, you can get a full portion like everyone else. That's how the Kesef Mishnah learns this Rambam. This is Rabbi Tzarachi, and God the Rebbe says that this raises a great question. Warum das was b'Midian notlu idach nit gleich b'biza? Nor with the Rambam ruf das Trumas HaMeches. What they received in Midian wasn't biza. The 2% is not called a portion of the loot. It's called Trumas HaMeches. It was a tax that was given to them. You can't learn from Midian to everywhere else that there's no rule. La'yiyah, La'shevet, La'yiyah, La'koyanim, La'levim, Kol Shevet, Levi, Chelek, V'nachla, because of this 2%. This wasn't a biza. There's no raya that they could receive biza outside of Eretz Yisrael according to this. So this brings us back to the Ravid's question. What's the Rambam saying? We see from the Rambam that outside Eretz Yisrael, the Koyanim Levim, they do get a portion, and in Midian they didn't get a portion. Now that we go back to Seif Aleph, where we explained that the war of Midian, As by Midian, that by Midian it wasn't a war to take over the land. It was a war of vengeance to kill them. So it's obvious, it's now understood that it's not connected to the other lands. Upon which the Rambam says that in those lands the Koyanim and Levim are equal to other Yidden. Well, the Rambam is referring to the type of land and to the type of war that the king is conquering the land, and he's saying that the Levim will get a piece of that land. Milchemes Midian is an entirely different type of war. In Matos the purpose wasn't to conquer the land of Midian. It was for the purpose of avenging the vengeance of the Jewish people, and that's why there was no biza, because it wasn't about it wasn't about the biza. It wasn't for the purpose of loot. It wasn't for the purpose of conquering anything. It was to kill them, and therefore the biza is a non-issue, and that's why the Levim don't get any of it. But it's not a stira to the fact that the Rambam says that in other lands, other conquerings, they would get a Chelek in the land and a Chelek in the biza, in the spoils, because those wars are wars of kibush, and those wars are not anything similar to the war of Midian. So asked and answered. The Rambam says that outside Eretz Yisrael, the Levim get an equal portion in the conquering of the land. So the David asked, 1 second, we see by Midian they did not get an equal portion. So the Rebbe answers very simple, because Midian wasn't the Milchemes Kibush, it was a Milchemes Nekama. It wasn't the war of conquering, it was a war of vengeance, and therefore the rules are different. So that's a very beautiful answer to the question of the David. In Sif Gimel, we're going to introduce another Rambam that's going to lead us to see that Milchemes Midian was not solely a Milchemes Nekama, a war of vengeance. And this is going to raise our question: if it's not a war of vengeance, then we're back to the David's question. Let's see how this plays itself out. We can ask a question on this. The Rambam paskins in Hilchas Malachim, Kishetzorin al ir letafsa, when we besiege a city to conquer it, ein makifin oisa me arba ruchaiseha, we do not besiege it on all four sides. Ela mishalosh ruchaiseha, we only besiege it on three sides. Umanichin mokim lebereach, we leave place for a person to escape, to run away. Ulechol misha yirtze limolit al nafshe, or anybody who wants to save his life, that they can get out of there. Shene'amar, what's the raya? Because it says by Midian, vayitzbu'u al Midian, they besieged Midian. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, though as Hashem commanded Moshe. B'pi hashmua lamdu, was passed down. Shebekach tzivo, what is the kasher tziva Hashem? That it should be done in this way, that it should only besiege it from three sides. So this is halacha in Rambam, that whenever Yidden go to war and they're besieging a land, they're surrounding the land to conquer it, they should leave the one side open so that anybody that needs to or wants to run away can do so. What's the raya? What's the proof? What's the source? Midian, vayitzbu al Midian. Was from Pashtus Lashon is mashmas. Now, if we look at the Lashon of the Rambam, we will see as the Dasar Rambam is Eich Milchemes Midian given in Suk von Tzarna Lila Tavsa, that Milchemes Midian was also in the category of besieging a city to conquer it. The Hainutzu Cave is Zain die Stadt. So it wasn't the Milchemes Nekama. It was a Milchemes Kibush. It's an example. It's being used as an example of Tzarna Lila Tavsa. Litavsa means Lekavsha, to conquer it. Unachmer, besides the Pashtus Haloshin of the Rambam, you also have a logical approach here, a logical question. If the purpose here was to kill them, so they wanted to kill them out of vengeance. Why would we leave a place for them to run away? If you're trying to conquer the land, so then the more people that run away, the easier it is to conquer. So you leave a space, they run away, and the conquering is easier. But if the whole purpose here is to kill them, then why would you leave an open space that they should run away? Then you can't kill them. So we see that Milchemes Midyan is not strictly on Milchemes Nekama. Otherwise, you would never leave it open. And we see this concept that the three side siege versus the 4 side siege is connected to the concept of Nekama. We see this in the Ragid Shevert. The Ragid Shevert explains as the Tzvei Deis in Sifri, that there are 2 opinions in the Sifri B'negei Vayitzbu with regards to the siege on Midyan. The first opinion in the Sifri, at least the Sifri Shalafanenu, says that they surrounded them from all 4 sides. Reb Nasan Oimer, a second opinion in the Sifri, says that Nasan Lehem Ruach Revi'is Kesh Yivruchu, that he left them an open side, the 4th side was open so that they can escape. Says the Ragid Shevert on this, the first opinion and Reb Nasan that are arguing in the Sifri, the argument is based on this very question. Was it a war or was it an act of vengeance? If it's a war, then you only put up 3 sides. If it's Nekama, then you would put up 4 sides. So this takes us back to the previous paragraph. It's Pashta Svara. If this was Nekama, they would have done 4 sides. So why, if the Rambam is saying you do 3 sides, obviously it's not about Nekama. Now, in the next paragraph or 2, the Rebbe is going to answer this last Svara. That the Svara, this Asvara Noisenas, we asked that since you want to kill them, you want to gather them in one space and besiege them from all 4 sides, so it should be easier to kill them. So the Rebbe is going to bring a Svara Fakert. Even when it comes to a war, for the purpose of vengeance, for the purpose of killing them, there still is a reason that one would leave a 4th side unbesieged, if that's a word, not besieged. It wouldn't be to save the people of the city because we want to kill them. Nor there is a logical explanation to want to leave a side open so that they shouldn't gather their forces against us. Because if they have no choice and they have no way out, then those that are besieged, they will strengthen themselves, and then they're gonna fight back and kill the Yidden. So this is the answer, that while there is a svara to say that if it's Nekama you would have to do it on 4 sides, there is also an opposite svara that you should do it on 3 sides, so that way they shouldn't join forces to fight and kill the Jewish people. And according to this, if you say that by Nekama there is also a reason to leave a side open, you would also explain that this is the intention of the Rambam when he uses 2 expressions. If you remember, the Rambam's lashon was libayreach, for one who's running away or for someone who wants to save their life. So why does the Rambam have 2 lashonos? You could say, if you would say that both by Milchama and by Nekama, you have to leave 3 sides, you have to leave 1 side open, that would explain the 2 lashonos. To leave a place for someone to run away is b'shaychas Milchama Nekama v'Milchemes Midyan. This is referring to a war of vengeance, like the Milchama of Midyan, where they're getting away, they're escaping, but not that we want them to escape. We want them to just not fight us. And anybody who wants to save their life, other wars where the purpose is not to kill them, we're opening a space for them to save their lives. So Beireach is on Milchemes Midyan, and Milchemes Nekama, and Limolet al Nafshe is on Milchama where the whole goal is not to kill anyway. So we don't mind if they go and they save their life. So this is just an extra explanation that it's shaykh that al pi svara, there is a reason that even by Nekama to leave the 4th side open. So even though we could forever the svara question, Nevertheless, when it comes to the lashon of the Rambam, we still left with a question. Aber von dem was der Rambam is Chelek eich Melchemes Midyan in der Halacha kishetzoren alir letavsa ein makifim v'chulu. The Rambam includes Midyan in the halacha that when one gathers on a city to conquer it, you should not besiege it from all four sides. Und noch even more than that. As the ganze din makifim wird abgelernt from Melchemes Midyan. The din of makifim, that to not close off the last side, is actually not just applicable to Midyan. It's learned from Midyan. Is mashma as euch Melchemes Midyan hatten sich etwas Tzad HaShaveh zu den anderen Melchemes. Was Matos ist zu Keves an die Stadt. Seemingly, that would mean that Midyan, the Melchama in Midyan, has some level of comparison to the other wars that are for the purpose of kibush, of conquering, which means that Melchemes Midyan, you can't say that it's totally different than the other wars, that this is Nekama and this is Kibush. This is Litavsa, and it's being used to be and compared to the other wars. So if that's the case, if there is a comparison between Midyan and the other types of countries that are being conquered, then the Ravi's question goes back to square one. But the Rambam zog, since Melchemes Midyan does have a similarity to the other wars that the Jewish kings are conquering, why do we find as the Bizas Midyan lay not that when it came to the war, to the loot of Midyan, the Koyanim and the Levim did not get an equal part with the rest of Klal Yisrael. So while we had a very good answer, the very good answer was that Midyan is different. We have now another Rambam that implies that there is a similarity between Midyan and other and other countries, other lands. And if that's the case, why take by Midyan did the Koyanim and Levim not receive an equal part in the Biza, in the loot? So now we have Sif Daled. In Sif Daled, the Rebbe is going to explain that Melchemes Midyan is still different, but not that it's not about Kibush at all. It has both. Midyan was both Nekama and Kibush. And the Rebbe is going to explain how that affects the Biza, the loot that the Levim did not get. We can answer that according to the Rambam, the war against Midyan had in it both elements, mataris, both goals. Number one, sees give then Muhammad to the Bnei Yisrael. It was a war for the vengeance for the Yid. But also a second purpose, it was also similar to a milchama of conquering, similar to the other types of wars that the king would conquer from the other lands. So right away you're going to say, where do you see kibush? In Melchemes Midyan, they didn't settle the land. And even though we don't find anywhere in the Psukim that they inherited the land of Midyan, let it over the Rambam. The Rambam nevertheless learns. As the Baal dictated it sailed as Vayishbu b'nei Yisrael of Neshei Midyan v'estapam, that since the Torah tells us that the Yidden, they captured the women of Midyan and their children, Ves kol behemtom, Ves kol mikneim, and their animals and their livestock, Ves kol chelam bazazu, and they took the spoils of their wealth, Vayikhu Ves kol hasholo, Ves kol hamalkeach badum v'abehema, they took the loot and the plunder. So they took all of the stuff, and even though Moshe was upset, und die Teine von Moshe is nar given auf dem was Achayisim kol nekeva. Moshe was only upset about the fact that they left the females alive. Moshe said the females were the ones who caused the Yidden to sin, so you should have killed the females. But after they come back with all of this loot, what does Moshe say to them? He doesn't say give it back. Und siva nar yirgu kol zocher batov. He tells them go and kill all of the male children. He also told them to kill the women, but L'cheira that we already told that, so therefore the Rebbe doesn't say it a second time here. But so Moshe says you can keep the money and the animals and everything like that. You have to kill the women and you have to kill the male children. But everything else you can keep. Which is different than the war of Amalek. Which by Amalek the commandment was destroy everything that belongs to them. They have no mercy upon them. And kill the men and the women and even the babies and the children. And all the animals. By Amalek, everything had to be destroyed. By Midian, they were allowed to keep most of the stuff. Therefore, this is understood that despite the fact that its purpose was a war of vengeance, which is why the men and the women had to be killed, but it wasn't to annihilate them. It was similar to a kibush, was similar to conquering, because they were able to take all of their spoils and hold on to them. And therefore, so now, that we have two aspects, we're going to see that in the two things, when it comes to besieging the land, we're going to go one way. When it comes to the biza, to the spoils, to the loot, we're going to go another way. Because there's two elements here. There's an element of nekama, there's an element of kibush. Says the Rebbe, when we're discussing whether you have to besiege the city from 4 sides or 3 sides, since by Midian the commandment was not to kill out all the inhabitants of the land, the Rambam paskins that you only besiege it from 3 sides, so that way those who do not need to be killed can run away. And from this we could learn and how much more so. When it comes to other wars, when they're entirely only for the purpose of kibush, and there's no element of nekama, then for sure you only surround it from 3 sides. So when it comes to the question of what to besiege, we look at the fact that it was not about annihilating the entire people, and therefore it would be like another war, and you only besiege it from 3 sides. Li'idach, on the other hand, as Midian is given since Milchemes Midian was primarily a war of nekama, even though we said that it had an aspect of kibush to it, but primarily it was about vengeance. Here, Gu Kol Zachar, kill out all the males. V'chalisha Yadasish, and kill out all the females that could be with the male. Nitzulib kibush, so it wasn't for the purpose of conquering. As Otzukumen binuchasav, to enhance his wealth. B'karkoi metaltli, whether real estate or movable objects. Biza, for the spoils. That wasn't what it was. They were able to take some stuff, but that wasn't the purpose of it. The purpose was nekama. The riber is their biza, the inyan from biza done. Therefore, biza here, the spoils here had a different category than in all of the other wars. Which in the other cases, the koyanim and the levim would get an equal portion. Over here, they did not get that. Nor trumas amechas, they just got the 2% tax. So the Rebbe explains this very beautifully. Yes, there is a similarity between Midian and other lands with regards to the siege upon the land. But with regards to the Biza, they're very different. Because since the purpose of this war was not for the Biza, therefore there's no reason for the Levim to get part of the Biza, part of the spoils. Midaf Rabbi Farstein, the Rebbe concludes Sivdal with a question. If that's the case, that the primary purpose of this war was the vengeance, then they shouldn't have even gotten the tax. If there is biza here, if it's considered a kibush, then they should get like everyone else. And if it's nekama and not biza, if it's for vengeance and not for loot, then why should they get anything? Like, what's the purpose of the meches? What's the purpose of this tax? So that's the final question. So we answered our question, Be'etzim. We asked in Siv Gimel, so 1 second, isn't Milchemes Midian similar to other wars? He says, yes, in certain aspects it is, because they were taking stuff home. They weren't destroying everything like by Amalek. So there is a similarity when it comes to kibush, and therefore we could learn one from the other. But nevertheless, since the primary purpose was not biza, therefore when it comes to biza, it's different than all the other aratzis. So now the Rebbe asks, if that's the case, why is there a trumas ameches? What was the purpose of the Eibusher? Yes, it was exeris akasav. The Eibusher said to do so, but why? What's the purpose? Hey, So in Sif A, the Rebbe is going to introduce another detail that we haven't yet discussed with regards to Milchemes Midyan. The fact that Shevert Levi participated in the war. They went to war with the rest of Klal Yisrael. Ulefizeh, it will be understood why they received a chelek, a little piece of the Trumas HaMeches of the tax. We'll understand this first by introducing another unique detail by the war of Midyan. From Pasuk L'chol Matos Yisrael Tishlochu L'tzava, the Pasuk that tells us that from all of the tribes of the Yidden you should send to the war. Learned of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva learns Lahavi as Shiftei Shel Levi. This includes the Shevert of Levi. As Oich Shevert Levi had sich mishtatek b'Milchemes Midyan, that also Shevert Levi participated in the war against Midyan. Und der Rogatchover is mevayer, and the Rogatchover explains, as in dem bashtet im machlokes in Sifri tzi Shevert Levi have a gamkim b'Midyan, that this is the basis of the machlokes in Sifri, whether Shevert Levi went to Midyan or not. So Rabbi Akiva holds that yes, but obviously there's another opinion in the Sifri that holds that not. Says the Rogatchover, what is the source of the machlokes? V'zetalia. It's dependent on the following thing: that if it was a war, a regular war, then they wouldn't go out. As the Rambam says, and we'll see later in the Sikha, the Shevert Levi doesn't go to war. But if it's for Nekama, then they would go. So Rabbi Akiva holds Lahavi Shiftish Levi that Shevert Levi did go. Why? Because it was a Nekama. So this is what we see, that a Yois, the Milchemes Midyan, was a Milchemes Nekama. Therefore, Shevert Levi participated in the war. So we have to understand this. Why generally do we say that Shevert Levi does not go to war? Says the Rambam, because they are removed from the ways of the world. And therefore, they don't go to war like the rest of the Yidden. So why in the case of a Nekama, a war of vengeance, as the Milchemes Midyan is Shevert Levi, why would Shevert Levi participate? So this is the new thing we're introducing. The Rabbi is introducing the fact that Shevert Levi did participate. We see it from the Pasuk L'chol Matos Yisrael Tishlochu L'tzava, especially if we're saying that it's a Milchemes Nekama. The Rogatchover explains that if it's for Nekama, then the Shevert Levi does go out to war. And the question is why? If Shevert Levi is, as the Rambam says, removed from the ways of the world, and therefore they don't go to war in other cases, then why would they go to war for Midyan? So the Rebbe is going to answer this question in Sivav by redefining what is the role of Shevert Levi. Not redefining, but defining what is the role of Shevert Levi. Shevert Levi is Huvda Lavid as Hashem L'Sharsei. Shevert Levi's role is to worship Hashem and to serve Hashem. Uleheir is Drachav HaYesharim, and to teach His just ways. Umispotav HaTzadikim, and His righteous laws. L'Rabim, to the people, to the masses. Lefichach, therefore, Huvd Lumidarkei Ha'olam, they were separated, removed from the ways of the world. Chulu Heim Cheil Hashem, they are the army of Hashem. Shevert Levi is the army of Hashem. That is their role. Is move on, and if that's the case, it's understood that if the war is not a war of conquering, which is the ways of the world, such a war could be applicable even to Shevert Levi. In other words, when the Rambam says Lo Erchim Milchama, Milchemes Kibush, a Milchama to conquer land, that's a very mundane thing. That's beneath the purview of the Leviim, who are the Chel Hashem. But if it's not a war Kedarkei Ha'olam, then possibly the Leviim would participate. Una Milchama is verbunden mit Hashem. But how much more so if the war is connected with Hashem, with the Eibishter, is als Chel Hashem, as the army of Hashem, darf euch v'davke Shevert Levi sich mishtatev sein b'milchama. Then Shevert Levi, not only they have to, but specifically them are the ones that should participate in the war, because it's a war of Hashem, and they are the army of Hashem. Milchemes Midyan is given losses nikmas Hashem b'Midyan, and when it comes to Milchama of Midyan, it was to take vengeance for Hashem on the people of Midyan. Geder v'teichen Milchama is while Midyan is aimed connected because Baruch connected Hashem. The whole purpose of the war was because Midyan was rising up against the Eibishter, against Hashem. Der Riber darf euch Shevert Levi sich mishtatev sein in der Milchama. Therefore, Shevert Levi has to participate in this war. Das is in Yodni v'Tafkide. It's their role and their mission als Chel Hashem, as the army of Hashem, uis for the nikmas Hashem, to implement the vengeance of Hashem. So this answers the question. The Rebbe's question was, why would Shevert Levi go to war if they're huvdulu midarchei ha'olam? So the Rebbe answers, it depends what the war is for. A war that's nikmas Hashem, that is in the purview of Shevert Levi. That's what they do. They're the army of Hashem. And according to this, we can answer our previous question, why there was Trumas HaMeches. Valpize move on das was by Melchemes Midyon is given that Tzivoy v'Aremeisa Meches la Hashem v'Gomer. So now we'll understand why by the war of Midyon there was a commandment from Hashem that they should separate a tax for Hashem. V'nasata le'Elazar HaKohen Trumas Hashem and give it to Elazar HaKohen. And then to take 1/50th from the part that was given to the Yidden, and to give it to the Levim. This underscores as the milchama is nita milchama v'yala milchama lubaz, that this war was not a war like any other war, which is for the loot and for the spoils. The purpose here was to carry out the vengeance of Hashem. Und der Pfarrer hat man euch von Malkeach Hashevi Badam Abehema gedacht abschneiden und aufheben und abgeben zu Elazar HaKohen und die Levim als Chil Hashem. And therefore from the loot and from the spoils, they had to separate and elevate and give a piece to Elazar HaKohen and to the Levim because they were Chil Hashem. Because the whole reason they were there was as the army of Hashem, therefore to emphasize this point. So first of all, there's a very basic nekudah, which the Rebbe doesn't say, but I think it's self-understood, that because they were involved in the war, therefore they had to be given something. But the Rebbe goes much deeper than that. Because this war, the reason they were there was as Chel Hashem, therefore to emphasize that a portion, a tax had to be taken off to elevate the spoils, to symbolize that the purpose here wasn't for the spoils, it was for the Eibishter. The whole thing was for the Eibishter, and therefore there had to be a meches, there had to be a tax that was given to the Eibishter. One of the Ha'aris, he mentions that even by the Levim, it says Shemrei Mishmeres Hashem. Even to the Levim, they received it because they were representing Hashem in this case. So they were the Chel Hashem, they were the army of Hashem, and therefore they were getting the peace. So this answers that question. So why was there no biza for them? Because it was a Melchemes Nekama, and it wasn't the Melchemes biza. Why did they get Trumas Meches? Because since it was a Melchama of Nekama for Hashem, they had to elevate whatever came in and give it to Hashem or to the Levim in the place of Hashem. So we have one more question that has to be that's going to be addressed. I think it's just one more question. So far we spoke about Eretz Yisrael. The Levim do not partake in the war of Eretz Yisrael, nor do they get anything back from it, not a portion of the land, not a portion, not a part in the spoils. Then there's Melchemes Midyon, which was a war of Nekama. It also had an element of kibush, so they do not get any of the biza. The Levim did go to war as Chel Hashem, but they did not get a portion of the biza because it wasn't a war that was for the biza, for the spoils. But they do get a Trumas Meches because we have to underscore the point that this war was a war for Hashem, and therefore that whatever does come in has to be elevated, a part of it has to be elevated to Hashem. What about a war that is not Midyon and is not in Eretz Yisrael? Lashon of the Rambam, those lands that the Malchi Yisrael conquer for themselves. Do the Leviim participate? And if yes, why would they participate in such a war? If it's Darkei Ha'olam, it's not Nikmas Hashem. That's coming the discussion in Siv Zayin and Siv Ches, and a very, very beautiful understanding, which we already discussed in a previous Sikha, about the deep bond between Eretz Yisrael and Klal Yisrael. Zayin and Dafa beverstehen. The din as leich im Milchama steht in the Rambam. This din that the Levim do not go to war is written in the Rambam. Behemshich to the halacha anal, in continuation to the previous halacha. As a nemenit kechelik beretz ubebiza, they don't get a portion in the land or in the spoils. Mashenki mishar haratzis, unlike the other lands where they do get a portion in the spoils and in the land. This is the words of the Rambam. Why does Shevert Levi not merit to receive an inheritance in the land of Eretz Yisrael and a part of the spoils with their brethren? And the Rambam answers, because the Shevet Levi was separated from the rest of the people to serve Hashem, to teach Hashem's ways, to teach Hashem's laws. And therefore the Rambam concludes at the end of the halacha, they are removed from the ways of the world. They don't wage war like the rest of the Yidden, and they don't inherit like them, and they can't gain anything, take possession of anything with their own personal strength. So if we look at the structure of the Rambam, the words of the Rambam, that these two dinim, one, that Levim do not go to war in Eretz Yisrael, and two, that they don't inherit Eretz Yisrael, are intertwined. Because they don't go to war. Why don't they go to war? Because it's Darkei Ha'olam. Therefore, they don't inherit. As it's very clear from the end of the Rambam, with the Rambam is he puts it all together in one sentence. Clearly, they're connected. Well, the fees that is coming. So, according to this, we must conclude as by the Muhammad's from Kibush Aratzis that those wars of the other lands, that in those other lands, the Koyanim and the Leviim are like everybody else, that they receive a portion of the land and they receive a part in the spoils. That would mean that they participate in the war. We just said that if they don't go to war, they don't get a peace. So if they do get a peace, it means they go to war. So this is understood from the Rambam, that in the other lands, the Leviim do go to war, and therefore they get a piece of the land or of the spoils. Now comes the Rebbe's question. The war against these other lands is not the vengeance of Hashem, nor of Kavish, and it's for the purpose of conquering. So why would Shevet Levi get involved? Shevet Levi is supposed to be removed from the world, not involved in the ways of the world. So Meila Milchemes Midyon, which was Nikmas Hashem, it was a war for Hashem, it was a spiritual thing. So they had to participate in that because they're the Chel Hashem, they're the army of Hashem. But how do they get involved in a conquering land war? So in order to answer this, first, we have to understand the way the Rambam phrases his halacha, where he is very specific and very elaborate in describing Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam says, these words, that Shevet Levi does not get a portion, is not spoken ella unless it's be'eretz, in the land. Which a covenant was made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and their children or their descendants inherited the land. It was divided amongst them. So the Rambam has a very long-winded description of Eretz Yisrael. Why are all these details relevant? Had the Rambam just said the words, the land of Canaan, the Rambam used that lashon previously, so clearly it's a lashon that the Rambam would use. So he could have used it again here, and we would have known exactly which land he's talking about. And even if he wants to connect, say it's the land of our forefathers, because he's saying that the children are the ones that inherited it. I think you can't zog and bet it in Avram. You could have said the land that was given to Avram. When we get into the Zebulashon and Rambam, and we find that Rambam himself uses this expression elsewhere. Was ist mechadisch der Mefahren sein, shenichnas la bris la Avram und Yaakov, und dazu noch Meister sein wie Yeshua b'neihem and Ischalkalem. What is the idea of the bris to Avram and Yaakov? Why does he have to elaborate on all three others? And why does he have to add that the children inherited it and it was divided amongst them? What is the Rambam doing here? We can answer the question. In the Lashon is mudgish the asbara sachilik shenichas bris und shararat shkevis melech. In these words of the Rambam, these elaborate words of the Rambam, it will explain to us the difference between Eretz Yisrael, upon which a covenant was made, and other lands that a king would conquer. Why in Eretz Yisrael there is Shevet Levi does not participate, and in other lands Shevet Levi does participate. Sivches. And Sivches, the Rebbe is going to explain to us the deep connection, the deep bond that we have with Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is a land was noch von früher vor der Milchama ausgeteilt für Shara Aratzes. Eretz Yisrael is a land that even before the Yidden went to war for it, it was already distinguished from all the other lands. Their meat was nichlis ela bris lavram litzchok Yankev, with the fact that a covenant was made upon it with Avram, with Yitzchak, with Yankev. Von demult on is es an Eretz Umitzies, welche is gebunden und wird einsach mit Bekabel Aretz. From that point and on, it is a land, it is an entity that becomes one with the recipient of this land. And the Rebbe explains, what do I mean by one? That's the whole concept of a covenant. That the parties involved, they walk between the pieces of one thing. Both sides pass through this one body, symbolizing that we become one. So the fact that there was a bris on Eretz Yisrael symbolizes that we've become one with Eretz Yisrael. Who is the Mekabel Aretz mit Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov? That all of the Avos, every single one of them, made a bris with Hashem, and therefore the bond between Eretz Yisrael and the Avos is very strong. Und sie kommt dann zu ihnen bepeil durch Yeshua b'neim. And how does it get passed down to the children? Through inheritance. Which inheritance automatic? Automatically, by being the children of Aram Yitzchak Yankiv, we inherited the land. We didn't have to write a contract. We didn't have to pay for it. We didn't have to buy it. Automatically, it's passed down. So just to explain where the Rebbe is going with this, the Rebbe is trying to say that, the Rebbe is saying that when the Yidden conquered Eretz Yisrael, they weren't conquering it to take ownership of it. It already belonged to them. And this says, there was no necessity here to create something new, a new category, a new definition of Eretz Yisrael. It was already theirs. Und die Eretz ist nischalkel lehem. So what happened over here was that the land was being divided amongst them. Shevert shekavshu is nit maspik. It wasn't enough that they conquered it. As David and Shevert shechok would have to be divided amongst them. Gegeben geworden zu Eden, to be given to the Yidden of Veirashtem es Eretz, to empty the land, to drive out the other people. V'yishaftem to settle it. He's yashvus in here. The only purpose of this war was to conquer it for the purpose of settling it. It wasn't to take ownership of it because it was already theirs. And therefore Shevert Levi, who is removed from the world, has no connection to this. If they were trying to take ownership of it, that would be a Kiddush Hashem, as we're going to see later in the Sikha. That would be something that they would be doing for Hashem. Therefore Shevert Levi would have gotten involved. But they already belonged to the Yidden. It was a practical thing, a logistical thing. They had to take it away from the other nations and divide it and settle it. That's a very practical, logistical thing to which Shevert Levi has no shaykhis. But when we discuss the other lands that a Jewish king would conquer, even though this would then be annexed to Eretz Yisrael and become part of Eretz Yisrael for all aspects, but it's not something that they need. The fact that the king is going to war with other nations, it's not so the Yidden should have a land, a place in this world, a field, a vineyard where they could settle. Rather, why is he doing this? To expand the border of the Jewish people and to increase his greatness and his people to know about his name, know about him, which is being said about the king. But the Rebbe explains with us as dus v'shem Hashem, which if it's a melech and malcha Yisrael, when Eretz Yisrael becomes bigger, and when the name of Yidden and it becomes bigger, this expands the knowledge and the greatness of the knowledge about and the greatness of Hashem. is the Riber di Milchama B'Regei di Arotzis Shayach to Shevet Levi as Chil Hashem. So these other lands, they're taking ownership of it. They're not just conquering it for the sake of settling it. They're taking ownership of it, so it's transferring ownership into the possession of Hashem, so to speak, or possession of Yidden. And the purpose of it is to make a Kiddush Hashem, and therefore it's in the purview of Chil Hashem Shevet Levi. This is the difference between Eretz Yisrael and other lands. Eretz Yisrael already belongs to the Yidden, and the entire war is only to settle the land, and therefore it's Darkei Ha'olam, it's the ways of the world to which Shevet Levi have no connection to. Whereas the other lands, the purpose of it is to expand the ownership of Eretz Yisrael and to make a Kiddush Hashem, and therefore Shevet Levi is involved as the Chil Hashem. So to summarize very, very quickly, there's three types of wars. There was the war of conquering Eretz Yisrael, which the Levim did not take part in the war, nor did they get any piece of the spoils or of Eretz Yisrael, because they are moved l'medarkei ha'olam, they're removed from the ways of the world, and therefore they had no connection to Kibush of Eretz Yisrael. Then there was the war of Midian, which was primarily of Milchama, of Nekama, and therefore they did participate in the war, because if it's Nikmas Hashem, it's the Nekama for Hashem, they as the army of Hashem have to participate, but they did not get a portion of the Biza because it was a war of Nekama, not a war of conquering, not a war for Biza, and therefore they didn't get any of that. But they did get Trumas HaMeches, because that was a way of showing that this Milchama was not a Milchamas Biza, but a Milchamas Nekama. It was being done for Hashem, and therefore a piece of it had to be elevated and contributed to Hashem through Elazar HaKohen and the Leviim. And then there's a war of Kibush, of Shara Aratzos, which is, in order, the purpose of it is to expand the ownership of Klal Yisrael and to make a Kiddush Hashem, and therefore Shevet Levi is part of this war because they're the army of Hashem, and therefore they also get a piece of it because they went to war, because they took part in it, they also get a piece of it like everyone else. The Hira for Yidden Davidas Yeruchnis, and here's the Hira for every Yid. A Yid does not varuch, it's a Shevet Levi, a Yid that is willing to be part of Shevet Levi. But the Rambam paskins halacha, as the Rambam paskins in the Rambam, the Rebbe always says that Mishnah Torah is halacha. So if the Rambam writes this in the Sefer Mishnah Torah, it must be that it is a halacha in Torah. And there's a shayach to Yid that Shevet Levi is something that is applicable to every Yid, as the Rambam writes. Like Shevet Levi Vlad, there's not only Shevet Levi, elakol ish v'ish, every person, asher not varuchai oisei, that is very willing, the vinay madoy and his understanding, liyibad lamed lefnei Hashem l'sharsi la'evdei, to separate himself, to stand before Hashem, to worship Hashem, to serve Hashem. Was demod, which is that's what the person wants and does. He becomes holy, sanctified in the holiest of holies. And the Eibusher becomes his portion and his inheritance, as the privilege that was given to the Kerim and to the Leviim. So a Yid that decides he wants to be like Shevet Levi, he wants to separate himself from the world, he wants to dedicate himself to Hashem, such a Yid can think to himself, since he is separated from the ways of the world and is standing ready to serve Hashem, what does he have to have any connection to the world? Let him lock himself up somewhere and learn Torah and serve Hashem and forget about the world. So we tell him in this Sikha that's quite the contrary. Vailer is Shevet Levi, because he's part of Shevet Levi. He is connected to the world. And a unique connection to do the work of the vengeance of Hashem and Midian, to win over and to neutralize those that are opposing Hashem. And when you break it down into practical, what does it mean? Mevatel sein legamri, und shelo sein dem pirud bis in es chinum was ken chas shalom sein zwischen den Nachbarn und Stan, to totally get rid of and remove any division and inexplicable hate that could be even explicable hate, unconditional. I don't know, it's hate for no reason that could be between Yidden. Was das hat gebracht dem Churban Abayis, which the sinas chinam brought the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, und dem Galus and the Ghost and the Ghost including this final Galus. And because this person who's now part of Shevet Levi is in the army of Hashem, Avas Yisrael, Avas Chinam, zwischen Iden, alle Iden, das ist verbunden und das verbindet nicht mit der Vayachad, to bring in a sense of permanence to Avas Yisrael amongst Yidden, all Yidden, which disconnects the Yidden with the Eibishter. You say to Mizu, and more than that, Kennt doch meine Nassis genug, also wird zwischen Eden und in was das gehört zu Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs. You could say, okay, fine, good, I get it. So I'll stay within the world of Yidden and the world of Torah mitzvahs. Is the Yeras kennen Mulavim darf sich beschatten sein eigen der Rabbi das machen für Schar Koloratzes. Achele Katel von Gvul Yisrael. You have to go even outside of the borders. You have to go into the other lands and make them, turn them into a port, annex them to the borders of Klal Yisrael. Even those things that on their own are not necessary to Yiddishkeit. Therefore, we have to expand the borders. To utilize them in the service of Hashem and to expand and enhance the greatness and the knowledge of Hashem. And this hastens the end of Galus by bringing to an end the singular cause of Galus, the sins, and right away there's a Geula, which then Yidden will receive the entire Eretz Yisrael with all of its borders, and also to expand the borders, including the lands that are on the other side of the Yarden, and ultimately Eretz Yisrael will expand into the entire world, so it will transform the whole world. But Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Karav Mamish, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.